This, dweebs and lady dweebs, is the AYANEO Pocket Evo. This thing is just big and powerful and premium. It's so much Android handheld that it's almost too much. I actually scrap that. It is too much. This is basically every retro handheld nerd's dream handheld. The most super top-end everything retro handheld that has ever existed, and I get to play with it. My job is so much better than yours. AYANEO is a super confusing company to me. In fairness, I get confused easily, but they are extra confusing. They make such cool and unique stuff, obviously driven by passion, passion for high-end hardware, passion for retro games, passion for slogans, but at the same time, they do some really baffling things with their products that just end up pricing them way beyond what most users are willing to pay just to play old retro games. And because of that, they can only really be enjoyed by the super enthusiast crowd, like me, not mere peasants, like you. It seems like AYANEO is the kind of company that doesn't want to sell millions of cheap devices. AYANEO means beautiful design, high-end materials and components, and top-end specs and performance. They're like the Rolls-Royce of handhelds. I don't actually know car stuff. Is Rolls-Royce still a good car? Yes. Yes, it is. So I'm going to ask you to keep this in mind during this video. Expensive things can exist, and they can do things to justify the expense. So let's not write this thing off just because it's expensive. Let's give it a chance to show us what it can do. Go on, you do your thing. No? Nothing? Well, no problem. We have ways of making you talk. Oh, and I guess I should mention that this is also an early review sample of the AYANEO Pocket Evo. Some of the stuff about the hardware and the software might change. Speaking of which, hey, AYANEO, let's get some orange and black stripes on here, all right? AYANEO always does nice boxes on their doodads. In here, we get the device, and under there, we have some word papers, and then in here, there's a USB-C cord. Not much fanfare with this one once you get inside the box, I guess. I have two cases here. This one is a nice white, more form-fitted case, some soft velvety fabric on the inside, and this one is really freaking cool. It's like a military hardshell case, retro power style with all the retro vibes that I love. I'm not usually one to spend extra on a fancy case, but I could probably be convinced to sacrifice some of my root beer budget for this thing. This Pocket Evo is powered by the Snapdragon G3X Gen 2. Well, I mean, they all are, not just this one. That chip is about as good as it gets when it comes to retro handhelds. We have several different RAM and storage configurations. You can get 8 gigabytes of RAM all the way up to 24 freaking gigabytes. Fast RAM too. And for storage, you can go from 128 gigabytes up to 1 terabyte of UFS 4.0 storage. The screen is a 7-inch frameless OLED screen, 1080p, 800 nits brightness, full HDR support, and a, get this, 165 Hz refresh rate. And we'll talk about that. And we get all the other good stuff like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.3 and a massive 8,600 milliamp hour battery. And it runs Android 13 and it's big, really big. I have the top-end retro power version with 24 gigabytes of RAM and 1 terabyte of internal storage. It comes in various prices and configurations, but AYANEO did that thing where they locked the retro power version behind the top-end specs, so you'll be looking at paying $645 for this model. However, if you want the lower end version, that's $395 to pre-order and lots of choices in between. I think if you want to get a lower end version, the 12 gigabytes of RAM model is the one to get. That should cover your needs for the vast majority of emulation stuff. The retro power version is definitely overkill for basically anything you could want to do. So that's more of a future-proofing kind of thing, I guess. There are definitely cheaper ways they could have future-proofed this though. Taking a look at the thing, we have a full glass panel front with angled sticks and buttons placement, that big 7-inch screen, of course. There's a function button up here, left stick in the upper configuration, D-pad in the lower configuration, start and select over here, face buttons, right stick, and a few function buttons over here. Up top, we have bumpers and triggers and a function button, and a power button with an integrated fingerprint reader, volume up and down, a performance mode switch, vent grill for airflow, and another function button. Nothing on the sides. Underneath Underneath, we have dual downward firing stereo speakers and a USB-C hole for charging and display out. And check this out. Here is the micro SD card door, but it's got this like gear mechanism to open it. How freaking cool is that? Around back, we have some curvy ergonomic humps to squeeze and a big vent grill for airflow and a couple more vents down there. You dweebs know how much I love my doodads to have the retro vibes, and they did that here. With the beige body and the red buttons, I love this combination of old and new. Please, AYANEO, keep doing stuff like this. But also, please, could you maybe stop locking the retro power version behind the top end specs? No? Oh, okay. I really love the hand feel of this thing. It fills out my hands just right, and the nice spacious bumpers and triggers give my fingies lots of room to do their thing. The sticks and the buttons are in just the right spot, and moving down to the D-pad also feels great. This is just about the most comfortable retro handheld that I've ever used, which is saying a lot because I have a data frog. However, AYANEO called this the Pocket Evo. It has the word pocket in the name, and no freaking way. Unless you have like big dumb clown pockets, this is not a pocket device. You're a liar. AYANEO can be hit or miss with their controls. I was really hoping this would be a hit, and it is. It's great. The D-pad has a really unique shape. Look at this. It's like a pudgy wide D-pad, but I actually love the way it feels. Great quality inputs, no false diagonals. The buttons are great too. Good size. They have a soft membrane feel with a very slight click to them. Same thing with the bumpers, and I love the shape of all this stuff up here. We have Hall triggers, and they have perfect quality inputs, and they are nice and big, which I like. And they have that comfy swoop to them that just feels so solid to use. Hall sticks with amazing input quality, just about as good as it gets. And these might be the most large and full-size sticks that I've ever felt on a handheld. I love the shape of the caps, and the cap comes off, but it's got this like hex bolt kind of threading thing. This part down here is metal, and then there's a metal ring around the stick shaft to give it that super smooth glide. This is totally over-engineered, but it feels amazing, and I love it. The screen is, there's a lot to talk about with the screen. It's 7 inches, so the same size as most PC handhelds like the Deck and the Ally. This is a bezel-less display, so the pixels go right to the edge of the screen. It's OLED, which is obviously super nice, so you get those pure dark inky blacks and bright saturated colors, and it's 165 Hz. Like, what? Did anyone even want a 165 Hz screen on an Android retro handheld? Obviously, if you're sticking to retro games, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that. Even RetroArch doesn't let you do black frame insertion on Android because of reasons. So there's literally no use for a 165 Hz screen when it comes to retro gaming. But for other stuff, PC streaming or Android games, hey, if you have games that can run at that frame rate, you can do it here. I need to mention that there are a few oddities with this screen on my early review sample. There is a slight green tint in the darks on the screen that only really shows up in specific circumstances. And there's also kind of a bit of a darkness on one side of the screen compared to the other. Again, at specific refresh rates and brightness settings. I asked AYANEO about this, and they said they're aware of it and that it will be fixed in a software update, and I just need to wait for that, and it should be fine on the retail versions. But I wanted to mention it because that's my job. I tell you this stuff, you watch the video, and you click the subscribe button. That's the deal we have, you and me. Beyond that, the screen itself is stunning. It's so big and bright and beautiful. Everything looks so good on this screen. Android games, streaming, modern games, everything. It's just incredibly beautiful. Sometimes when I'm gaming on this, I actually drool. AYANEO should probably include a drool bib because I think that's going to be a pretty common thing. Retro handhelds are not known for having great sound quality, but the Pocket Evo is probably the best sounding retro handheld that I've ever heard. It's super loud and it's actually bassy. It's nice to be playing retro games on this thing and hearing the game sounds as if they're coming out of a proper set of speakers for once. The system is, nothing special. It's the same as it is on all the AYANEO devices. I'm not going to go in depth here. If you want a tour, maybe check out my AYANEO Pocket DMG video because I went into detail there, and it's the exact same software here. The one thing that I'll show you is the side menu because this is actually pretty important. press this button down here and this menu pops out and you can change the performance mode on the fly and adjust the fan setting. And also here we have the ability to change the refresh rate and some other stuff, useful stuff. Unlike this video where I just glaze over important things so that I have more time to make dumb jokes. Like this. I set this thing up the way that I set up all my Android handhelds, which is that I installed Nova Launcher as my main launcher. I installed all the emulators that I wanted, and for my front end, I went with ESDE. I love this setup. It's easy to use, it's fun to browse through your games. Check out my Android emulation setup guide if you want to know how I do this stuff, if you want to be as cool as me. Yeah, right. Good luck with that. This thing is powered by the Snapdragon G3X Gen 2, which is as good as it gets in a retro handheld. So you can play everything. Everything you can play on Android, you can play here. We're talking PS2, GameCube, Switch, 3DS. For Switch, the performance is great, but the bottleneck here is the emulator. Because Switch emulation is stalled and these emulators aren't progressing now. And lots of games have major issues, so we'll see how the Switch emulation thing shakes out in like a year or two. PS2 is no problem at all. Every game will run, and the vast majority of stuff will run at 3x resolution and at the balanced profile, so you'll get a ton of battery life. However, the hardest to run PS2 games like Need for Speed Most Wanted, you'll need to go down to 2x resolution and run them at the game profile. GameCube and Wii is a similar situation, but there, everything runs at 3x resolution and the balanced profile. Wii games are especially nice here because those run at native widescreen, so you don't get that chunky, weird polygon culling around the edge like you do on lots of GameCube games with the widescreen sheets. And since you can run all this stuff at 3x resolution, they look incredible, upscaled on this big screen. I play a ton of retro games, as you know. Basically all I do other than make videos and build pillow forts. But when I get to see these old games with their beautiful polygons and pixels in a new way, like being blasted into my face on a 7-inch OLED screen, it makes me fall in love with them all over again. This thing is just so nice to game on in general. It's a big comfy handheld that feels more like a handheld PC than an Android retro doodad. And the controls are probably the best that I've ever used on a handheld. Whether or not all that justifies the price, we'll talk about that, but just know that the actual experience of playing retro games is completely uncompromising here. Android gaming is one area that things aren't ideal. What runs amazing, and they look amazing, and they run at high refresh rates. It's very, very nice. The problem is that some games just don't work. I wanted to fire up Balatro, and that just wouldn't install for some reason. And Call of Duty works, but it doesn't detect the native controls, so you'll need to use the screen mapper, which works, but it's not great. I didn't test any WinLater stuff yet, and I think that I'll save that for a future video, so stay tuned for that. PC streaming is another thing that is so good on here. Oh, and this does have HDR support, so you can click that toggle in Moonlight and get full HDR on this OLED screen. It really does feel like you're playing these games natively on your device, but you need to have a gaming PC for this, obviously. This battery is gigantic. It's 8,600 milliamp hours, which is just a ton of juice. I didn't do any extensive battery drain benchmarks, but I did do some time test and I've extrapolated the data, whatever that means. So I do have some numbers here. This Snapdragon G3X Gen 2 chip is just so efficient, and this battery is so huge that this is the kind of device you can really game on and not have any battery anxiety. Depending on your use, this can be a multiple day device on a single charge. So obviously, I love this thing. When I'm playing games on this, any kind of games, older games, newer emulation, Android games, streaming, I feel like I don't deserve to have this. Like it's just too much for a cheapskate like me. And it's not cheap, not at all. The low-end model costs as much as the low-end Steam Deck, and the top-end model costs as much as the top-end Steam Deck. And on the Steam Deck, you can play PC games and retro games. But here's the thing, I have both this and a Steam Deck. And there are lots of reasons that I would grab this instead of the deck if I wanted to play retro games. The Pocket Evo is just a nicer way to play retro games than the deck, or even any of my other handheld PCs. It's because of the premium build, the amazing controls, OLED screen, never-ending battery life, and it looks like a retro thing, and that's important to me. It makes me like retro games more on it. This almost feels like an endgame retro doodad. It's that good. Now, whether or not that price is justified, I mean, I don't know. I will say that if I had extra money, If I had a well-paying job instead of being a poor YouTube guy who lives in his mom's basement, I'd personally consider getting this. I mean, it's under $1,000 and there are lots of guys my age who spend a lot more on their hobbies than I do. But I'm a super nerd. Most people probably don't need to go spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a luxury retro handheld. Cheaper devices exist for those people, and they play the same games and they're lots of fun. So yeah, you do you, buddy. I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money, unless you are interested in supporting me on Patreon. Link below. So, what do you think of this thing? Would you ever consider getting something like this? Are you drooling right now? Or do you think I'm a nutcase for thinking this is worth a month's root beer budget? Actually, don't answer that. My root beer budget is not up for discussion. And that brings us to the end. Click the thumbs up button if you liked the video, or don't if you didn't. That's it from me. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.